At dawn, when the dust still floated like a prayer over the fields, and the world had not yet decided whether it would be kind or cruel that day, Thomas Hale stood barefoot at the edge of his failing farm, staring at soil that refused to yield anything but stones and silence, a poor farmer with empty hands and a heart that somehow still believed in mercy, unaware that this very morning would change not only his life, but the fate of a child, a woman, and two worlds that had long misunderstood each other. Thomas had never been meant for greatness. He had been born to hardship the way others were born to comfort, and by the age of 35, hardship had become his closest companion. His wife had died young, leaving behind a small grave under an oak tree and a silence that followed him everywhere, and the land he worked, scraped together through debt and stubborn hope, barely fed him, let alone promised a future. Yet despite hunger tightening his ribs and loneliness pressing on his chest, Thomas carried a quiet kindness that refused to die. He shared water with travelers, patched broken fences for neighbors who could not pay him, and left bowls of grain outside his door during harsh winters for anyone, or anything, that might need it. It was this habit of giving, even when he had nothing, that led him one morning to notice a woman standing at the edge of his field, watching him with eyes dark as storm clouds and steady as mountains. She was Apache, her presence unmistakable, her posture proud yet burdened, and she carried a small bundle close to her chest. Thomas felt fear rise instinctively, fed by years of rumors and warnings whispered by men who had never bothered to learn the truth. But something stronger than fear held him in place. He noticed how carefully she stepped, how exhaustion bent her shoulders, and how the bundle in her arms stirred with the soft sound of a child's breath. When their eyes met, neither spoke at first, and in that silence lay centuries of distance and distrust, yet also the fragile possibility of understanding. Slowly, Thomas lifted his hands, palms open, a gesture he had learned meant peace, and said the only thing that felt right, "You look like you could use water." The woman hesitated, then nodded once, and that single nod became the first thread in a bond neither of them yet understood. He led her to his small home, offering her his only chair and the last of his bread, tearing it in half without thinking, because hunger was familiar to him, but turning someone away was not. As she ate, her eyes never left his, searching, measuring, weighing the worth of his soul, and when the child in her arms whimpered, Thomas fetched a clean cloth and warmed water over the fire, his movements gentle, instinctive, as if grief had carved space in him for care. It was only later, after the child slept and the sun climbed higher, that she spoke, her voice low but steady, telling him her name was Ayanna, and that she had walked for days from her people, carrying a child not born of joy but of loss, a child whose father had died in a conflict that had taken too much already. She said her people believed children were gifts meant to be raised in strength and love, and that this child, a boy with quiet eyes, deserved more than grief and wandering. Thomas listened, not interrupting, not offering solutions, simply bearing witness, and in that listening, Ayanna felt something she had not expected. Safety days passed, then weeks, and though Ayanna never asked to stay, Thomas never asked her to leave. She helped tend the small garden, sang soft songs to her child under the open sky, and shared stories of her people. Stories of resilience, of harmony with the land, of honoring life even in hardship. Thomas, in return, shared his own stories of loss and endurance, of loving a woman he could not save, of believing that kindness was the only wealth no one could take from him. Together, they worked the land, and though the soil remained stubborn, something else began to grow, a mutual respect that transcended language and history. One evening, as the sky burned orange and purple, Ayanna watched Thomas kneel in the dirt, coaxing fragile plants to stand a little straighter, and she saw not a poor farmer, not a man broken by loss, but a soul capable of raising a child with patience and honor. That night, after the boy had fallen asleep, she sat across from Thomas by the fire, the flames casting long shadows on the walls, and spoke words that would echo in his heart. "Forever, my people believe a child chooses his parents, even when the world does not understand why. Thomas looked at her, confused, his chest tightening with a feeling he could not yet name. Ayanna continued, her voice trembling just slightly. This child needs a father who knows hunger but does not let it harden his heart, a man who has lost and still chooses to give. I have watched you. I have tested your kindness without telling you, and now I choose you to be the father. The words struck Thomas like thunder, shaking every doubt he had ever carried, and for a moment he could not breathe. He thought of his empty pockets, his failing land, his unremarkable life, and he shook his head, whispering, I have nothing to give. Ayanna met his gaze without flinching and said, You have everything that matters. In that moment, something inside Thomas broke open, not in pain but in release, and tears he had not allowed himself since his wife's death fell freely as he realized that love had found him again. Not in the form he expected, but in the shape of responsibility and hope. Accepting that choice meant risking judgment, danger, and the anger of those who would never understand, and when word spread among nearby settlers, fear followed quickly. Some warned him he was inviting trouble. Others mocked him for thinking a poor farmer could raise a child born of another world, but Thomas stood firm, because once you choose love, fear loses its power. The true test came months later when a severe drought ravaged the land, drying wells and turning fields to dust, and Thomas faced the impossible decision of selling his farm to survive. As he packed what little he owned, Ayanna prepared to leave, believing she had asked too much of him already, but Thomas stopped her, placing the child gently in his arms and saying, This land may fail me, but I will not fail him. That night, as if the earth itself had been listening, clouds gathered and rain fell, not enough to save the crops entirely, but enough to remind them that hope often arrives quietly, not as miracles, but as chances. When Apache elders arrived weeks later, drawn by Ayanna's absence and rumors of her choice, tension filled the air, and Thomas stood trembling yet resolute, ready to lose everything to protect the child he now called his son. But instead of anger, the elders found a man who bowed his head in respect, who offered water and shelter without demand, and who spoke not of ownership but of responsibility. In a moment of profound realization, the elders saw that fatherhood was not claimed by blood alone, but by devotion, and they honored Ayanna's choice. Years passed and the child grew strong, learning to plant and harvest with Thomas, to sing the songs of his mother's people, and to walk with pride in both worlds. The farm never became rich, but it became abundant in ways money could not measure, filled with laughter, shared meals, and a sense of belonging that healed old wounds. And so, in a place once defined by loss and division, a poor farmer and an Apache woman proved that compassion is a language understood by all, that generosity transforms not just those who receive it, but those who dare to give, and that sometimes the greatest legacy a person can leave behind is the courage to choose love when the world expects anything but.